We're on. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience, and good afternoon. Welcome to the Sir Patrick Moore Planetarium here at the National Space Centre. Now, before we announce our keynote speaker, who I'm sure you're very familiar with, just a quick health and safety announcement. So we aren't expecting an emergency. If there is one, please make your way towards the back of the planetarium and we'll exit through the doors that we came in. We'll meet outside of the Space Centre, just head up towards the top of the car park, and our members of staff will guide you out the right doors if there is an emergency. So it's now time to introduce our keynote talk, and it is my great pleasure and delight to introduce John McFall, who is a European Space Agency Astronaut Reserve. So back in 2022, John was actually selected as a subject matter expert for a feasibility study called FLY. And it's a one-of-a-kind, unique European Space Agency initiative where we're looking at and exploring how someone with a physical disability might actually be able to go on a long-duration spaceflight mission. So the program is opening up the doors and making space exploration even more inclusive for everyone. So in the next half an hour, John is going to be sharing his unique journey, and I guarantee it is very unique, and some of the challenges and positive things that have come out of adapting human spaceflight so that we can expand opportunity beyond the boundaries of Earth. So we'll have a short time for questions and answers at the end of John's talk, so hold your questions until then. And without further ado, I'd like to warmly welcome John to the stage.
Thank you so much. Those seats look so comfy. Are they good? Yeah, they're perfect. I love planetariums. They're such fascinating places to be. Always fascinated when I go in them. It's an amazing window into the cosmos. It's great. Now, I am, as you'll see, relatively lighthearted and relaxed, and I want this to be enjoyable for you guys. So there will be a little bit of interaction, actually, whilst we're in my talk. So bear that in mind. But what I want you to do whilst we're chatting is I want you to think about this word on here. I want you to think about opportunity and think about your world and your lives and those around you. And hopefully you'll appreciate a bit of a theme as we go through this talk. Now, I was an incredibly handsome child. But really, the two cornerstones, if you were to ask me, tell me about your childhood, John, the two cornerstones really that underpinned my childhood were probably sport, getting out there and doing stuff, and an interest in the way that stuff worked. And that can be science, it can be engineering, whatever, but just those two things really were the things that interested me in life. And probably back then, these days where I'm stood on this shingle beach, I probably didn't know that or what it would lead to. But I was always very, very curious about the world, and really that's kind of shaped part of my journey to get to where I am today. Now, I have memories growing up of my dad telling me stories. My dad was in the army, and he would sit down and he would tell me about stories of places he had been, things he had done, and I would sit there with my eyes on stalks as he was telling me about waking up in the jungle with a massive bullfrog on his chest, and he smacked it with his water canteen and knocked it out, and then tied it to a tree and then cooked it for breakfast in the morning. I was like, wow, really? Stuff like this. Having to tip scorpions out of his boots, jumping out of airplanes over the desert, all sorts of stuff. And so I also had this spark of adventure that, adventure and challenge always piqued my interest as well. And I had this very, very small window into what the wider world was like and what was possible through the experiences and stories that my dad used to tell me. So I actually thought, well, it sounds like a jolly good idea to go and see the world and go and have some fun if I go and join the army. So that was actually my intention. At the age of 14, 15, 16, I saw myself with a future career in the military. And so that's what I set out to do. And at the age of 18, I looked into doing my qualifications and assessments to get into Sandhurst to join the army to train as an officer. And I did some bits and bobs here and there. But I thought, you know what, before I do that, I want to get a degree under my belt. I want to go and do my army officer training following having done a degree. I didn't really care what degree I did because I didn't think it would matter because I just wanted to go and join the army. So I thought, I love sport, I love science, I'll go and do sports science, which is what I applied to do at university. But before I went off to university, I thought I wanted to see the world a bit, to get a bit of life experience before I go into university. Have some stories to tell of my own, perhaps, of places that I've been, things I've seen, things I've done. So I took myself off traveling at the age of 18, all on my own, actually, because none of my mates at the time wanted to kind of head in the same direction as me. So I thought, well, okay, I still want to go traveling, so I went off to Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and eventually Thailand on my own. Backpacked my way around that part of the world, ended up in Thailand. And really, this is where most of you will appreciate that my life changed in a way that I could not have predicted. And I was out visiting the sites on a small island called Koh Samui in the south of Thailand with a South African friend of mine. We were going exploring, and I was riding a motorcycle. It's what you do loads in Southeast Asia to get around places. You just jump on a motorbike and away you go. And I was riding a motorcycle, and 19-year-old boys, being 19-year-old boys, I was probably riding it a little bit too fast as I was coming into a corner, and all of a sudden I realized I was really losing control of this motorbike coming into this corner. I thought, my God, what am I going to do? And you know how everything just slows down. Everything goes in slow motion. And I thought, well, I just need to try and control this bike. So as the bike was falling to the right-hand side, trying to go around this corner, I stuck my leg out to stabilize the bike. And in doing so, I did a huge amount of damage to my right leg, which unfortunately resulted in the amputation of my right leg at the knee. And this is a picture of me about 6 weeks, 7 weeks after my accident, something like this. And I had just been playing frisbee on the beach for 3 weeks without a care in the world, thinking that, or knowing or hoping that I was going to go to university and join the army. And all of a sudden, that rug had been ripped out from underneath me. And I very much felt like this. I felt like I was falling, and I had no idea what was going to happen when I hit the ground, or hit the water in this case. You know, what am I going to do? I can't join the army anymore. Can I run anymore? You know, I had no idea what sort of shape my life would have ahead of me. And it was a really, really tough time. And I think really what I lacked there was an idea of what the future held. And I remember having some very, very dark days when I was first brought back to the UK. So I was pretty sick, actually, when I was in Thailand. As a result of the injury, I actually lost an awful lot of blood as well, and I got really, really sick. The rest of my body got pretty sick as a result. And I was eventually well enough to be flown back to the UK. And eventually I then began my rehabilitation as an amputee in southwest London, in Roehampton. And some of you may have heard of Douglas Bader. I was actually rehabilitated at the Douglas Bader Centre in Queen Mary's Hospital in Roehampton. But I remember very, very vividly being there. And it was a bit like boarding school. I would stay there during the week, and I would go home at weekends. I had this side room to myself, and during the day I would go to what they called walking school, and I would learn to walk again and do other physiotherapy and exercise. But one particular night, I found myself lying in my bed, and I was scrunched up on all fours, sobbing. Just this absolute, uncontrollable outpouring of grief that was just so deep and just kept on coming. And it felt so natural. And it was grief because I had no idea what the future held for me. Now, I don't really consider myself as a particularly creative person. I was probably at the back of the queue when they were giving out artistic talent. But the only thing I could think of doing at that particular time was writing it down, writing my emotions down, what I felt. And on my bedside table in my hospital room, I had a photo album that I'd just been filling with the pictures that I had back in the days when you used to print photos out. Do you remember those days? And I had printed out my photos, and I was populating my photo album with these photos. Anyway, so this was sat on my bedside table. And at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, in this outpouring of grief, I pick up this book. And I start writing stuff down. And I wrote a poem, and the last few lines of this poem read, "As my tears dash this page, they are not of sadness, regret, despair, nor guilt, but madness, to have overlooked the fact that my heart is still beating, and that from behind the doors for which I'm now reaching, opportunity arises." And I titled that poem Opportunity, and I wrote that poem 25 years ago, and I find it very, very interesting that I'm stood here in front of you guys today talking to you about the opportunities that I have had in my life. And it was at that point that I really realized that if stuff was going to happen, if I was going to be happy again, it was up to me to open the doors, walk through those doors, and seize those opportunities that were behind those doors. And it was solely my responsibility. No one else was going to do that for me. And besides, I realized there was far too much cool stuff in the world to be sat on my bum in a hospital bed complaining. So I learned to walk again, and I carried on doing the things that made me tick, right? And that was getting out there and seeing the world. It was traveling. It was climbing mountains with my mates. It was snowboarding. I worked in Canada as a canoe, kayak, and mountain bike guide. I've done Tough Guy and Tough Mudder races. I've ridden camels across the Mongolian desert. There is so much fun stuff out there, and it's up to us to go out and seize those opportunities. But there was still something missing. I wanted this guy back. I wanted this guy back, this guy who loved running down the track carefree, listening to the sound of the wind rushing past his ears, because they're pretty big ears as well, so it was a lot of noise. You know, that reward that you get from challenging yourself in the sporting arena. And this picture really does epitomize me as a kid and where you would find me. I used to love my sport, but running in particular. And now that I was an amputee, in particular a leg amputee, getting back to running for me was something that I really, really wanted to do because I knew that it would give me my independence back, my identity, that sense of self that I was striving for. And so I taught myself to run again. And it was probably 18 months after maybe 18 months or so after my accident, I taught myself to run in a normal, what we call an everyday leg. So not a leg specifically designed for running. It's a purely mechanical leg with a hydraulic cylinder in it and a normal sort of flat walking foot. And it was not pretty. It was, as in the prosthesis was very pretty. My running was not pretty. It was hard. It was clumsy. You know, it was cumbersome. And the fact that I was running with a normal everyday walking foot, you don't get the same sort of energy return that you need when you're running. But all the same, I was running. And I had that sound of the wind rushing past my ears again under my own steam. And I had that independence back. And I knew that I could do it. Now, the problem came is that I wanted to take it a little bit further. And so I joined my local athletics club. I was down at university in Swansea at the time, actually. And I joined my local athletics club and went along to some training sessions to see if I could improve my running, get a little bit better. Could I get back to the sort of kind of running that I used to do when I was a kid with two legs? And I would do their training sessions, and I remember so many times I would be running down the track, and then all of a sudden there'll be a poof as my hydraulic cylinder exploded all over the track. At the end, as my legs straightened out, poof, as the cylinder broke. Because these prosthetic knees were not designed for this level of activity. And so I would call up my guy who made my legs, who was still based in London, and I'd say, Tom, I'm really, really sorry, mate. I've just broken another prosthesis. And he's like, oh, okay. And he would send a spare cylinder down. And in the meantime, I'd be walking around on this really kind of floppy leg that was pretty useless because I'd broken it. And in the end, he sent me a whole box of these spare cylinders down. So every time I bust one, I would just swap it out, send it to him, and put a new one back in again. And I think actually he got so fed up with me that we ended up making an argument for building a running prosthesis on the NHS. So this was probably the first running prosthesis, specific running prosthesis made in the NHS. And this was in 2003. And so we made this running prosthesis, and you'll be aware of them. They're the ones with these sort of curved carbon fiber blade type foot, if you like, and just a very small hydraulic knee unit. And I remember getting this prosthesis in 2003, and I took it to my first training session, and I put it on, and I ran around the track doing my warm-up, and I could not believe how normal it felt, how natural it felt, how symmetrical it felt. And I thought, holy moly, this is what I remember running feeling like. And I remember at the end of that training session, actually, I got into my car in the car park, and I sat in the car park, and I cried. I cried because I knew I had it back. I knew I had back what I had been striving for, that real sense of freedom and independence, and that love of running that I had returned. And at that point, I knew everything was going to be okay. But what was super cool is that experience took me on the most amazing journey. Now that I had a running prosthesis, I wanted to know what I could do with it. And so I spoke to some people in Wales at the time. It was the Disability Sport Organisation in Wales. And they took me under their wing, and they took me to some competitions, and that was where I had my first international competitions. So I then became an athlete. I was like, what? I never set out to be an athlete. And all of a sudden, there I was in my early 20s, an athlete with this sort of new identity. I had my first European Championships in 2005, where I competed in Finland and won a bronze medal in the 200 meters and a fourth place in the 100 meters. And then I became a funded professional athlete. And that journey took me all the way to Beijing in 2008, where I competed in the 100 meters and came third. And do you know what is really, really interesting about this is that I've got a piece of hardware around my neck, which I'm incredibly proud of. It's great. No one can ever take that away from me, right? But the most important thing is not that piece of hardware around my neck. The most important thing is what the 8 years it took me to get there represents and what is behind that medal. And in that 8 years, to get to stand on that podium, I learned so much about myself, challenging myself, learning about myself. I really, really started to appreciate what I could get out of life if I put the effort in, what I could achieve with hard work. Lessons that I'd really wish that I'd appreciated and understood when I was 14, 15, 16, that your parents want you to appreciate when you're that age as a teenage boy. But it took me losing my leg to work that one out. I couldn't or didn't want to. Who knows? I knew that I wasn't going to be an athlete for the rest of my life. You know, it was never going to be a proper career, and it was something that I couldn't do long term. And within the world of sport, was there something that I wanted to do and work in sport? I'm not entirely sure. But what I had learned, as I said, in that 8 years leading up to that medal is that I knew that if I put the hard work in, I could achieve pretty much anything. It gave me a confidence. Ironically, I was a far more confident person, far more comfortable in my own skin now in this situation as someone with a disability than I was before I lost my leg. And so I had some thinking to do. I had to think, well, what do I want to do for the rest of my life, professionally? And I didn't really see a career for me living and working in sports and exercise science. I didn't really see a clear kind of career path in there. And that kind of took me back to think, what do I enjoy? What do I like doing? It's like, well, I love trying to understand how stuff works. I like fixing things, and if there is something that I can do in my day-to-day job that incorporates that, then why not give it a go? And I'd learned that actually I really like the way that the human body works from my sports and exercise science studies, all my human physiology and my biomechanics and all those sorts of things. I loved trying to understand how the body worked. I thought, well, why not try and learn more? And this gave me the confidence to then go on and apply to medical school. So at the age of 28, I went back to university and I trained as a doctor in Cardiff University in South Wales and graduated in 2014. And pretty immediately after starting medical school, literally medical school, day one was like in the dissection room, cutting up dead bodies, learning anatomy, and I was like, this is cool. And at that moment, I knew that surgery was for me, that I wanted to be a surgeon. And with my background in sport and with my background in understanding human movement and the muscles and bones and everything like that, I thought orthopedics is for me. So I graduated from medical school in 2014, worked for a couple of years as a junior doctor in South Wales, and then began my surgical specialty training in about 2016, and then trained specifically as a trauma and orthopedic surgeon in the south of the UK until 2023, where I did my consultant exams, my final exams as an orthopedic surgeon. It's a great job, a hugely rewarding career, hugely interesting. And for me, it brings together so many things that I love. The technical aspect of medicine, so having to understand all the theory about medicine, how humans work, how their bodies work. But actually what I like about surgery, it's practical, it's hands-on, you're doing stuff, you're fixing things. And for me, I found that super interesting and rewarding. But you never know when there's a sneaky opportunity around the corner. And it just seems that, opportunity is all around us, right? Opportunity is everywhere. And it's our responsibility to seize that opportunity should we choose to. And in early 2021, a friend of mine who I worked with sent me a message. He said, John, mate, the European Space Agency are looking to send Paralympians to space. And I was like, what? And enough of a what to go, that sounds interesting. And it was true. The European Space Agency were recruiting for a new class of astronauts. There was a new astronaut selection. But uniquely within that as well, they were looking to recruit someone with a physical disability with absolutely no guarantee of going to space, no guarantee of a space flight. But to recruit someone with a physical disability to do a study, to do a technical study, to do a feasibility study, to try and understand if we can clear the path to space for a professional astronaut with a physical disability. I thought, what an awesome opportunity. I read the person specification and I saw what it involved. And I saw what the requirements were. It was like, do you have this academic qualification? Yep, okay. Some of those. Do you like working in difficult environments? Yep, I can do that. Are you a little bit crazy? Yep, probably. And the person specification was right up my street. And I think if you think back to what I said earlier about my desire to join the army, I never got the chance to join the army and maybe experience that operational role in those challenging environments and that adventure. I still felt there was something that I needed to quench. And if you look, funnily enough, someone's put me on Wikipedia, and one of the things I stupidly said a while ago, which happens to be recorded there, is that I want to run across the Sahara Desert and row the Atlantic. So clearly someone who might have liked challenges most of his life. But for me, this opportunity, I saw that within this opportunity as well as having an opportunity to understand more about science and the way that the world and the solar system and the universe that we live in works. So naturally, much to my wife's dismay, as I was just about to become a consultant and lead a settled life, settled down, kids in school, earn a bit of steady money, I applied to be an astronaut. Well, not to be an astronaut, to do this feasibility study, which could potentially lead on to being an astronaut. And it was quite a lengthy selection process. It opened in, I think, April 2021, and we were finally selected in October or November 2022. It's about 18-month selection process. Many different stages, some cognitive tasks, some psychomotor tasks, so sort of hand-eye coordination, memory, spatial awareness, lots of interviews, some team working, lots of medical examinations. They love your eyes, lots of eye tests. And for whatever reason, they liked the cut of my jib. I was fit enough and healthy enough that I passed the selection process, and I was selected in November 2022 as a cohort, part of a cohort of 17 new European Space Agency astronauts. Now, I mentioned earlier that there will be a little bit of interaction. Just to give you a tiny flavor of what one very small test in the astronaut selection was, I've brought along a little example for you guys to take part in. All right? Everyone happy? Yeah? Okay? Okay. So this particular test was called perceptual speed. Okay, so it's a little bit unfair of me to do this to you guys, because I actually, when you go through selection, you receive the samples of the test materials. So you get some practice materials about 10 days before you have to go to Hamburg and do your tests. So I had a bit of an advantage because I had 10 days to sort of study beforehand. You've got no time. But you're going to be awesome. It's great. So this is called perceptual speed, and I'm going to talk you through the instructions, and we'll have an example, and then I have some small tests for you to do yourself, okay? So you will be shown an instrument panel, okay? And this is the instrument panel. It looks like this, okay? Everybody with me so far? Phew, good, that's lucky. Okay, read only the dials that have the critical attributes that you've been instructed to look at, okay? And I'm going to talk about that now. And so there are 4 possible critical attributes to the dials on the instrument panel. They can either be round, okay? They can be square. Black. And guess what? White, okay? So those are the 4 critical attributes, all right? Your job is to read the indicator on the dial and remember the 4 numbers. So there will be 4 dials that have that attribute. There's a clue for you anyway, okay? All right? And when you read the dials, you read it like you read text, so from left to right and top to bottom, so you read it like a page in a book. Make sense so far? Okay. Now, you'll see, if you pay close attention here, you'll see there's some missing numbers. Okay, so sometimes if you look quickly at the dials, you'll have to infer or guess what number the indicator is pointing to. The numbers are always 1 to 8. Okay, so there's no 9 or anything like that. However, the 1 is not always at the top. They're always in order, so always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But it may start somewhere else on the dial face, okay? So 1 might start down in the 4 o'clock position and go all the way around. So just be aware of that. So the dials do move a little bit. Okay, so here's a practice. What's the critical attribute? Round shape, okay? So you've got to read the dials that are just round shape. Okay? So, what you should have (6135). Okay? Everybody got that? Is there a pointer on here? There is a pointer. It probably doesn't show it real. So you got here number 6, number 1, because we go from 8 and back to 1 again. We don't go 8, 9. So 1, 3, because you're missing the 2 there. 1, 2, 3, and 5. Everybody happy? Okay. Right. Here's the first test. Are you ready? Oh, and by the way, there's a timer. And it gets less and less the further you go through the test. Okay, ready for the first one. Round shape. Okay, same again. You're looking for all the dials with the round shape. Read off the dials and remember the 4 numbers. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Oh no, that was the previous. Wait, there we go. Awesome. Good job, guys. Okay, different attribute now. White color. Okay? So all the white dials you have to read. So it doesn't matter whether they're round or square, they've just got to be white. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Okay? Smashed it? Yeah? Everybody confident? Okay. So give yourself a pat on the back if you got any of those numbers. But 7241. Good man. 72 had a 72 down here. Quicker next time. Quicker. Focus. Right. Be the dial. Be the dial. Round shape. It's not the same numbers as the previous one. Might be. Don't know. Okay, here we go. You ready? Let's go. Three, 1, 7, 6. Okay, another one. Black one, black color this time. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. What? Did you not have enough time? No? Two, 5, 1, 7. Okay. Last one. You ready? 3, 2, 1. Anyone? 3 something. 3, 2, 8, 6. Good stuff. So, how long do you think you had to see the first one that was timed? That was 4 seconds, actually. 4 seconds. How long do you reckon this last one was, the most recent one? No, it's 1.75, 1.75 seconds. Goes quick, huh? It's really quick. And this is from the actual tests that we did. If it's any consolation, I could rarely get all 4 numbers for the fast one. I could get 3 pretty much all the time, and occasionally I get 4, but I couldn't get all 4 all the time. It's hard. So, I got spat out at the end of the selection machine and was successful. And I was, the plan was to go and do this work with ESA to see if we could clear the path to space for a professional astronaut with a physical disability. So how on earth were we going to do that? Well, we had an awesome team at ESA that we put together, a really nice small team, actually. And we had to work closely with NASA because we had to make some certain assumptions. And that was that if I was going to go to the International Space Station, that I would be mainly based in the American part of the International Space Station. So if those of you who are maybe not familiar with the space station, it's essentially made up of 2 main chunks, a Russian chunk and a US and other international partners chunk. So we're talking about the American chunk that I would be going to. So that would be one thing. And I would probably launch on a SpaceX spacecraft, so in the Crew Dragon spacecraft on a Falcon 9 rocket. So we worked closely with our international partners. And what we had to do was understand what the existing requirements were for an astronaut to fly to space, and see where me, with my prosthesis and my disability, how meeting those requirements might be affected by that. And then we had to, so we broke this down into several different areas. We looked at training, we looked at spacecraft operations, we looked at International Space Station operations, and we looked at medical operations as well. And across those domains, we had to understand which requirements we might need to do additional assessments for to prove that it was possible. So across all these requirements, we identified areas that may need consideration, further investigation, if you like. So areas where we might have to go and do some more tests and evaluations to prove that it's okay. And you might be thinking, okay, well, what are those? And have a think about those as well. If you've got some questions at the end related to that sort of stuff, please do ask. And well, we looked at, within the scope of this study that we did, we actually looked at more than 80 requirements. And some of them we could just sit around the table and have a discussion and go, yeah, this is okay. We think this is going to be all right. So, for example, skin health. Yep, skin health is okay. This is particularly relating to my amputated leg, so my stump. If any problems we come across any problems with skin health and stump, there'll be topical creams, medicines that you can use for that sort of stuff. Other things we actually had to go out and essentially do tests for and assessments for. And these were things like, for example, training. So European astronauts and other astronauts, during their basic training, they are required to undertake sea and winter survival training. Well, can someone with a lower limb amputation do all that with their prosthesis? Can their prosthesis stand up to that? Can they get through the physical requirements and the rigors of doing winter survival training, sleeping out in the snow, hiking up mountains? I don't think people thought that it was impossible, but they just didn't have the evidence to prove that it was possible. And that's exactly what we were setting about doing. How would the microgravity environment affect the way that my prosthesis would fit? When you go up into space, fluid in the body doesn't behave in the same way. At the moment, we have gravity pulling fluid down into our legs. You don't have that in microgravity, so you tend to get more of a pooling of blood and therefore fluid in this part of your body and a bit more on your head. Would that mean that my prosthesis wouldn't fit very well, and would that cause problems? Especially when you think about, I need to do exercise to live and work in space for long duration. We're talking about living in space for 6 months or more. So you need to do exercise to keep your bones healthy, your heart healthy, and I need to wear a prosthesis to do that. So actually wearing a prosthesis is pretty critical for some activities. Could I get in and out of the spacecraft in an emergency? What happens if there's a problem at launch and I have to get out in an emergency and get off the launch pad? Could I meet the emergency requirements that SpaceX set out, along with these are their standard requirements for all astronauts? And so we had to go about testing all of those. What would happen if you stick me in a centrifuge, other than it being really fun? Would that cause problems with my prosthesis? Would it cause problems with the fit of my socket on my stump? Would it be uncomfortable? The answer is no, it's not. What about my bone health? I'm an amputee, and actually what many people don't realize is that although I'm very, very fit and active, and I run a lot, and I'm walking around and it looks like I put completely even weight through both my legs, actually the bone, my thigh bone in my right hip, is not as thick as the thigh bone on my left side. And that's the same in all lower limb amputees, no matter how active you are. So is that going to be a problem? Do we need to have any additional what we call countermeasures for that? So all sorts of questions. And I'm very, very happy to say that actually, as a result of the probably 18 months or so work that we did, we published the feasibility study at the end of last year and officially released it at the beginning of this year. And we found that there is no technical showstopper for someone with a disability like mine being a professional astronaut to live and work as a fully integrated team member or crew member on the International Space Station for a long duration mission. And this is also a world first. You know, no other space agency in the world has done this. So really in Europe and in the UK, we are pioneering and leading the way. So what next? Well, I would love the opportunity to fly. And really, we have moved from our fly feasibility study into a phase called Fly Mission Ready. And this phase of the Fly initiative is geared towards making sure that should a mission become available to me to fly to the International Space Station, that I am assignable to such a mission. So you might think, well, what does that... Oh, wrong button. What does that entail? Well, when astronauts go into space, we do a lot of science and research, okay? We look at different technologies, we look at all sorts of experiments and different kinds of science to understand how things are different in microgravity. And so what we wanted to do is put out a proposal for people to submit scientific proposals, put out an announcement for people to submit scientific proposals to do science in space specifically related to me being an amputee. And so this is one thing that we have done. We've now shortlisted 4 proposals, which could be potential experiments should I get the opportunity to fly. So we're ready to go with that. Now, anything that flies to the International Space Station has to be certified to fly. And that's like, it could be a laptop, camera, all sorts, any piece of hardware. It has to meet all the requirements to fly inside the spacecraft, but also on the International Space Station. So at the moment, this is an ongoing process. We know that I need to take some prosthetic hardware with me to space, and that, at the moment, is going through the hardware certification process. And finally, any human who flies to the International Space Station, so every astronaut that flies to the space station, has to be medically certified to fly there. And that's done by a medical board made up of all the people who are involved in the space station. Like I mentioned to you earlier, that's Russia, Japan, Canada, US, and Europe. Their medical board has to get together and say, yes, this person is safe and medically fit to live and work on the space station. And in February this year, I was awarded the highest level of certification, so that's the certification to live and work on the space station for 6 months or more, by this medical board. And what's really interesting is that this has never been done before. No one with a physical disability has ever been certified before. So this was a huge, huge milestone. And because of the amazing work that we had done in our team at ESA with the feasibility study, we would be able to provide them with all the information necessary to help them make their decision. So I'm keeping most things crossed, all 5 of my toes. Now, life is not easy, right? Life can be pretty hard sometimes. It's not hard all the time, but it's pretty hard sometimes. And I have been through some dark times, certainly in my early days as an amputee, trying to navigate my life, my new life, and understand where I wanted to go and who I now was. And I've carried some words with me from 25 years ago. And I always come back to these words in times of difficulty and when times are tough. And it's about working hard when things are tough. And in the Christmas just after I lost my leg, my parents knew that I had these aspirations of exploring and adventuring and stuff, and they were worried that I would not get the fulfillment out of life now that I was an amputee that I had hoped to get as I may have got having not been an amputee. And I remember they gave me this one present at Christmas, and I opened it up, and it was an atlas, a big A3 atlas. And I used to love just sitting down. I spent hours just looking through atlases, looking at places in the world, going, oh, I would love to travel from there to there and stuff. But written on the inside of this atlas was, always go the extra mile. Life will reward you. I'd like to thank you all very much for taking the time to listen to me, and more than happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, John. We've probably got just under 10 minutes for questions, so we've got a couple of roaming mics. If you would like to ask John a question, if you pop your hand up, Josh and I will try and get to as many people as possible. Let's start down here.
Having special needs and disabilities, having a proper support system is definitely very vital. Would you say that your support system was very enthusiastic about meeting your needs, or did you have to advocate for yourself in that area sometimes?
A mixture. I think my immediate core group around me were 100% advocates for me. I think what I found, as you will probably find in many industries across society, and I found in the space agency, was that people's expectations or people's appreciation or understanding of disability is purely built on their exposure to disability. And so if they are slightly naive or appear judgmental or dismissive or whatever, it's usually because they have not got a great deal of exposure, had a great deal of exposure. So there was a bit of educating along the way, here and there, but it was leading by example as well, and just going out and doing it and showing them that, changing their preconceptions that way.
Can you please tell us more about how you trained for the tests before you were admitted to the program?
How I trained for the tests?
Yes.
I'm maybe a little bit embarrassed to say I probably didn't do a lot of training for the tests. It wasn't quite like being an athlete. Really, do you mean the cognitive tests that I did? The one that I gave you, the test that I gave you, yeah, I just sat at a computer for as much as I could in 10 days, whilst still working as a surgeon, like full time. I was like any spare moment I had, I was like, right, yes, go, and just as much time as I could. There were so many tests as well, right, that we had to do. It was quite difficult to fit much preparation and practice time in. There was another really cool test as well, actually, which was you had to visualize in your head a cube. So picture a cube in your head, and in your head you've got to picture that there is a cross on a face of that cube, okay? And that cube can only turn on its edge, and then you get these instructions that say where the cross starts, so starting position front, and then they tell you how it moves after that. And they go starting position front, back, left, right, forward, back, forward. Then you have to say where the cross ends up. That was good fun as well. But it was just all practice as much as you could in the short space of time that you had.
Sure.
Did you actually have to, or did your feasibility study decide that you had to make any significant alterations to either your hardware, i.e. your prosthetic, or the space station or the rocket?
Yeah, good question. Very, very minimal. Very tiny modifications to the footrest in the spacecraft. And that's because when I sit with my knees bent, because my ankle is fixed at 90 degrees, the position that you need to sit in the seat, I'll see if you can... yeah, so you see here, this picture here, when you're sat in the seat, you're a little bit like that. And so in my configuration, I would end up being like that, and so my heel wouldn't sit on the footrest, and SpaceX make just a change to the footrest so that you can accommodate that. And the reason why you have to have your heel on the footrest is because there is a slot in the back of in the heel of the boot. There is a longitudinal slot that you slide onto a cleat that's on the footrest. And so it has to slide into there. So that was one very small thing. And really, the other thing is basically some minor modifications to my prosthesis. So the hydraulic fluid in the prosthesis that I'm wearing now, we have to use a different fluid. But actually, really, really minimal.
Lovely. Any other questions?
Can I just say thank you very much for sharing your story with us and inspiring us. Two quick questions. One around SpaceX that you keep mentioning. I thought that was private, and yet is ESA more sort of a public governmental thing? So is SpaceX not really interested in your study and thinking, well, let's just take this and run with it? And then the second question is, would you mind sharing the poem with us that you mentioned earlier? Maybe put it on Instagram or something, if it's not too private.
Oh, I'd have to be brave to, yeah. Maybe I'll think about that one. So your SpaceX question. As you may remember, Thomas Pesquet was the first ESA astronaut to fly with SpaceX in 2021, I believe. And the reason why this came about is largely because we don't fly with the Russians anymore. Because of our relationship with Russia, ESA quite clearly said, well, we're not going to fly on the Soyuz rocket and platform anymore. So, and this is a problem for Europe, right? Because we have historically been dependent on other agencies for access, for transport to space. Now, when the shuttle was decommissioned in the early teens, 2011, 2012 or so, the Soyuz was pretty much responsible for taking astronauts up, and there was a gap in crew vehicles, and NASA awarded a governmental contract to SpaceX. So SpaceX, whilst they have their own private ventures, Starlink and everything like that, actually they supply NASA with a US crew vehicle. And so NASA astronauts and Russian astronauts, Japanese, Canadian, and European astronauts all fly on SpaceX's Crew Dragon. So there are only two, at the moment, there are only two reliable, should I say, ways of humans getting to the International Space Station. One is on the Soyuz and one is on SpaceX's Crew Dragon. The other is Boeing Starliner, but you could be there for longer than you hoped. That was the two astronauts who ended up being there for 9 months rather than 8 days. Yeah. So they're still having some teething problems with that. And interestingly, Boeing and SpaceX were awarded the contract at the same time. So two companies were awarded the same contract to supply NASA with a crew vehicle. And SpaceX did it a little bit quicker and more reliably.
If you could travel any place in the world that you haven't travelled yet, what would it be?
Ooh. South America, probably. Places in South America I would love to go to. I've not been there yet. Chile, Argentina, places like that. Some wilderness with some vast geographic features. Or I'd like to drive from here to Mongolia, but that's cheating because I've been there already. Yeah, I mean, you can shout out if you want. I'm sure I could.
Should we do one here?
What are you most excited
Oh,
about?
we'll do yours first, and then we'll come to you. How did I feel when I first arrived at ESA? How did I feel when I first arrived at ESA? Excited, very excited. A little bit nervous because I didn't know what was going to happen. And I missed my kids as well, because when I first arrived at ESA, I was there on my own for a few months before my wife and children came over.
What are you most excited about when you go to space?
I'm most excited about being a good astronaut.
Oh.
I have to say. I think I'm most excited about doing the job well. And then in my spare time, I'm going to be most excited about floating around trying to catch food in my mouth.
Thank you.
Actually, first thing I'm going to do when I get there is probably go for a wee, because it might have been a long time since leaving Earth to get into the space station.
Any other questions?
You spoke about being a good astronaut. So when you get to space, what do you actually have to do? Like, what's
Yeah,
a day-to-day
great question.
life in an astronaut's life?
Be an astronaut, they say. What do they do? So astronauts' time are broken up into different chunks depending on what needs doing. So about a quarter of your time is spent working with experiments in space. We call them payloads. So working with experiments. Astronauts are very much caretakers, if you like, or custodians of science or other people's experiments. So as an astronaut, you're there to help experiments keep running and doing science. Also, you might yourself be a scientific experiment. So you might be doing science on yourself as part of our helping our understanding of how humans are affected by microgravity. So that's one thing, science. I said you have to do about 2 hours a day, 6 days a week of exercise. And this is probably about 16 to 20% of your time as well. So you can see why it's a big chunk of your time actually trying to stay healthy to avoid the effects of microgravity. Then there are what we call every day-to-day operations. So, for example, if a cargo vehicle comes up with a whole load of new cargo, food, and new parts for experiments, you then have to unload all that. So that's what we call sort of standard operations or cargo operations. You might be doing public outreach activities. So, remote interviews with schools and all sorts of stuff like that. You've got to eat. You've got to sleep. Catch up with your family here and there. So that's pretty much what astronauts do. Do robotics. So sometimes we have to move stuff around the space station. There's a big robotic arm on the outside of the space station, and we can move things around on the outside of the space station to do that. And also, again, when these cargo vehicles come up to visit, it's the robotic arm generally that catches it and sticks it to the space station. So that's quite fun, doing robotics. I've done the robotics training, which is really good fun. So yeah, lots of stuff. Bit of floating around every now and then. Some Saturdays are cleaning day. Saturday mornings, cleaning day.
What a note. All right, I think we've got one last question. So Josh, shall we take one from that end?
Hello, thank you for the talk. You mentioned your wife and...
Yeah, go for it, sorry.
Sorry.
We had an interloper down here, sorry.
You mentioned your wife and your children. How did they react as you passed the different steps and got selected? And I was wondering if it's more excitement, if it's more scared. Are they excited about you becoming a public figure? Or maybe not able to juggle your agenda the same way?
Yeah, good question. So my youngest daughter, I didn't tell them anything about it for a few rounds because there wasn't really much point. And then I kind of kept being successful in the rounds, and Daddy kept on disappearing for work, and so I had to sit them down and tell them what was going on at some point. And at which point, my youngest daughter, I think my wife, that was it. I was at work, and my wife sent me a video. She just took a quick video of them saying good night, because when I'm away, you always do like a good night video. Night, Dad. And my son was like, hi, Dad. Good luck in Germany. I really hope you do well, because I'd love you to be an astronaut. And then my middle child was like, Dad, really wishing you loads of luck. I hope it goes super well. It's so cool what you're doing. And my youngest one goes, Dad, I hope it doesn't go very well, because I really don't want you to be an astronaut. But actually now they're fine with it, and it's funny because it's been for such a long period of time. It's quite everyday exposure for them. I think it will become more real if actually there is a mission for me to be assigned to go. That will be slightly different. At the moment, they probably can't conceive that enough until it maybe becomes more real. But yeah, they're okay. They take it in their stride. Yeah, bearing in mind they go to school with the children of 3 other astronauts. So like everyone in the school, their parents are astronauts. So as far as they're concerned.
Thank you very much. I'm unfortunately going to have to say we're going to have to stop there. We've run over time already a little bit. Thank you all for your amazing questions. And can we give John another huge round of applause? Thank you so much for coming to be our keynote speaker.